is a prepaid collect call from an incarcerated individual at Muskegon County Jail. This call is not private. It will be recorded and may be monitored. If you believe this should be a private call, please hang up and follow facility instructions to register this number as a private number. To accept charges and consent to this recorded call, press 1. To refuse charges, thank you for using Securus. You may start the conversation now.
Hello?
Hi. Long time no
my
talk.
sexy wife. Honey, I'm home.
I wish. Oh my God, dude.
I do
this
too.
Can't, this can't be 30 years. This can't. I'm sorry, but I'm going to say something, and I hope it doesn't make you hate me, but I hate your mother. I hate her. I hate
Shanda?
her for what she... Yes, I hate her.
You don't have to call her my mother. You can just say Shanda, because here's the thing. I'm not sure if I've said this before, but there's a difference between a mother and a mom, in my opinion.
Yes.
A mother
and
is merely someone who gave birth to you. She doesn't have. She can even be irrelevant in your life. You don't even have to call her mom or mom.
But it's because of her. It's because of her that I can't be with you.
Welcome down the rabbit hole, friends. Jenny, the 48-year-old prison girlfriend of Paul Ferguson, is angry with Shanda Vander Ark. And why? Because she believes Shanda is the reason she doesn't have direct access to her booty call with Paul Ferguson.
And
I know.
You know what? I will say this one thing. I know that people say all these horrible things about you and stuff like that, but you know what? I have dealt with people that have had almost kind of like mind control over you, where you're made to believe that things aren't as bad as they are.
Thanks for your riveting insight, Jenny. Okay, let's get into the real of what's going on here. In our last video, we listened to a call between Paul and Trish, his stepmom, and we talked about the family dynamics, the really strange ways in which everyone in this family was operating, and the fact that Paul and all of the other kids were not in a perfect situation with Trish and Eric after Shanda left either. Okay, so following Timothy's death, police interviewed several teachers, CPS caseworkers, and family members in order to get some kind of a picture of what Timothy's life had been like. And through that, we also see what was going on with Paul. Because even when Paul and Timothy were living back in Oklahoma with Trish and Eric, it's likely that they were still being neglected and dealing with some pretty negative family relationships. Jean Ellen S. is a middle school special education teacher in Oklahoma City who taught and interacted with Timothy on a regular basis during 6th and 7th grade when he was still living with Trish and Eric. Jean describes Timothy as a very sweet boy who craved attention, but she advised that herself and other staff in the special alternative school were concerned about Timothy's well-being, and they had contacted CPS in Oklahoma more than once about what was going on. Jean and other teachers suspected neglect within the home. And again, remember, this is when they were living with Trish and Eric. The school staff had to have Timothy take showers at the school, and they also provided him with clean clothing on a regular basis. Jean told law enforcement that she was told CPS in Oklahoma had investigated sexual abuse involving Paul and Timothy when Timothy was in elementary school. And honestly, it was through these interviews, I'm going to go over more as we go on in the video, that I came to understand the depths of neglect and serious problematic behavior that's been going on in this family, specifically surrounding Shanda Vander Ark for decades. One of the reasons I'm so interested in this case, and many of you who are longtime subscribers know this about me, is that as part of my career, I worked in a child sex offender unit. And yes, it's true. There are a lot more cases of children offending against other children than the average person is aware of. And my experience on that unit taught me so much about children like Paul and families like the Fergusons. I've come to believe it's highly possible that Paul was sexually abused within his family of origin. And when I say that, sexual abuse can constitute inappropriate boundaries with your children. And it turns out we have a lot of evidence that that's exactly what was happening in the home when Shanda lived with these kids. Okay, we will eventually get back to Jean's interview, but for now, we need to skip ahead and take a look at this shocking interview with Glenn Ferguson. He is the father of Eric Ferguson and therefore the children, Timothy and Paul's grandfather. Glenn actually contacted police himself, and he said that he had a lot of concerns. His son Eric may not have told the full truth to police in their investigation, and he called to follow up with additional information. Glenn said that his relationship with the kids was a good one, and they visited the children at least once a year in Oklahoma. He talked extensively about the ADHD medications Timothy and Paul were on. He felt that they were heavily medicated, maybe even over-medicated. Glenn stated that at some point, Timothy was actually placed in a facility for an unknown period of time. But when Shanda was living in the home, Glenn alleges that she tried to keep the kids in all of their bedrooms by placing monitors in the hallway. So in the trial, we were made to believe that this idea of putting cameras everywhere and monitoring everything that was going on was a new thing in the home after her new husband had a stroke. However, according to this grandfather who knew Shanda from a decade earlier, she was already instituting this kind of weird, strict discipline much earlier on when both Timothy and Paul were young. Glenn talks about additional sexual misconduct in the home between other children besides Timothy and Paul. So we know there is a history of inappropriate behaviors going on in this house perpetrated by children. Working on a child sex offender unit, one thing that is consistently emphasized there by all of the doctors is that statistics show there's something like over a 90% chance if a child acts out sexually against another child that they have already been abused by an adult or treated inappropriately by an adult in the past. And I think there's a strong chance that sexual abuse and inappropriate sexual boundaries and contact were going on with Shanda in her home long before the kids were taken away by CPS. And sadly, Glenn Ferguson shockingly goes on to confirm this when he states to police he has heard that Shanda had previously brought pornography into the home and had showed it to the children. Now, Glenn isn't the only one to make this accusation. I've heard it before in other statements from friends of the family, and we especially heard a lot of that when Zav Girl, a YouTube channel who's been covering this case, interviewed a close family friend. Now, the person was anonymous, so we don't know everything about them, but I covered this in a prior video. This family friend said that Eric and Shanda, especially Shanda, was very inappropriate in the home with her children, that Eric and Shanda lived a certain kind of lifestyle, and that there were times that things were left out, such as sex toys, and the children were around them and even played with them. She also stated that the eldest brother, Nolan, was put in charge exclusively of the children. He was pushed to provide the majority of the care, including diaper changes, and there wasn't really appropriate privacy among siblings in this house. And that is all related to the care of Eric and Shanda. They were showing these kids inappropriate boundaries when it comes to privacy. And the result can easily be that children will act out, especially if they are isolated. And family friends have also noted that when the children were young, they didn't have many other friends or other people around them besides their siblings. Glenn Ferguson's interview is a sad peek at the truth of what was going on behind closed doors in the Ferguson household when these kids were in their formative years. And after Shanda left the house and the children were returned to Eric, we have so many interviews with teachers which seem to present the idea that the children were still neglected once Shanda was gone. Getting back to the interview with Jean, she lets us know that even within the school system, Paul and Timothy were not allowed to have contact with each other in elementary school because Paul was the alleged offender in the sexual abuse case. Jean says that although the kids never came to school with any signs of physical abuse, she did see Timothy acting out in school. He wasn't aggressive or violent, but he was desperate for attention, especially from the adults around him. And he got it any way he could. Jean is one of those people who once again lets us know that she did witness Timothy having issues such as bladder accidents, and at times he would have to use a pull-up because of that. And one insight that Jean shares that no one else can give to us is that Jean lets us know she approached Trish, the stepmother. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I believe that Trish was probably thinking she was doing the best she could with a very difficult situation. I've heard her speak to Paul in these phone calls, and I do think she seems to have a lot of love and concern for these kids. Although we all know that she is the one who told Eric she was no longer able to care for Timothy. So when we take a look at Trish, we know that there's not all good or all bad going on with her, but I do have to say that I hold Eric really responsible for what was going on in that household, even when Trish was there, because Trish had an awful lot of kids to take care of. She had her own children plus Shanda's children, and she was dealing with all the repercussions of what had happened when Shanda was the primary caregiver. So according to Jean, she expressed a lot of her concerns to Timothy's stepmother, Trish, and Trish told her that Timothy had a tendency to wet the bed, steal food, and hoard at home. And so Jean offered and suggested counseling within the school. It was a program called Positive Changes. But this is where things get kind of sketchy. Trish declined to enter Timothy into the program. Now, we don't know why that was the case. Maybe he had to stay after school and Trish couldn't get there, to pick him up. I'm not sure, but a lot of people have questioned why Trish would turn down this kind of help, specifically when all of these kids every single one of them seems to need some kind of intervention. And I do find it interesting that at the end, Jean talks about how Timothy was absolutely capable of attending a public school, and she really questioned why in the past Shanda had decided to homeschool and why she homeschooled in Michigan. Although Jean never had any contact with Shanda. She just didn't understand it. Like Timothy, and I don't understand that part either. Timothy came to Shanda. There was something going on where she was having a difficult time controlling him. Why would you keep him in the home 24/7? If you're dealing with these, quote unquote, awful behaviors, why would you isolate him into the home instead of getting help from your local public school, which could have given him a break from that house for 6 to 8 hours a day and probably would have done a lot of good for Timothy. And although Timothy is the ultimate victim in this horrible tragedy, I do wonder about Paul. What kind of treatment did he get after he was removed from the house and placed into foster care? We have no evidence that he received any treatment for his inappropriate sexual contact with his brother. We do know that both Eric and Shanda were required to take classes before they could try to get the kids back, and Eric did take them. Supposedly, he worked really hard to get his kids back. But then we have the interview with his stepdaughter, Chelsea, in which she says, Eric was never around. My mom, Trish, did everything. Eric wasn't there. So how much could he really be implementing that which he learned through the CPS classes if he didn't take any ownership or responsibility for his own children? I have so much more to say and additional interviews to go over with you, but let's go back and finish up with the call between Paul and his new prison girlfriend, Jenny. One of the things that I really want to bring to the forefront here, and again, I'm not justifying what Paul did, I just think it needs to be looked at and dissected and talked about truthfully. I want to make it apparent that Paul had a difficult childhood. Like, he was in a bad place in the same way that Timothy and a lot of the other kids were in a bad place as well. I do believe that he was neglected and potentially sexually abused, even if it was just in the way of inappropriate sexual boundaries with his mom. And I have to be honest with you, Shanda and the way she treated Paul primed Paul to get into this relationship with Jenny. And this whole situation is just an opportunity for her to get some kind of attention and affection she's not getting in her real life. Let's listen in to the call a little bit further.
And, sometimes you find out too late. I mean, you obviously, I'm going to only say this one thing and then we're not going to talk about it on the phone, but, you were the one who sent pictures to her. So you obviously knew. Something inside of you knew. Like, something clicked. And
it didn't click enough. Obviously it didn't. Because it is true that Paul took pictures of Timothy and sent them to Shanda and was like, he needs to eat. But then he continued to abuse Timothy. And the autopsy report shows that Timothy's main cause of death was hypothermia. And it was Paul who put him into the ice bath under the direction of Shanda for like 6 to 8 hours the night before he passed away. It's incredibly sick and sad. And I can't even imagine. I feel like Jenny's just playing this game of reaching out for anything to make Paul feel like she's on his side. Well, you knew, and so it's not your fault. Well, if you knew, then you should have done something about it. And any rational person would be saying those things to Paul.
You know what? Had she listened to you at that point, your brother could still be alive. And that's her fault because she's the mother. And the fact that I connected with you and we connected instantaneous, like we were like meant to be together, and because of her, and then for her to, you know what she should have done? I'm a mother. I'm going to tell you something. I'm a mother. What she should have done is she should have taken 100% blame. You shouldn't have even been brought into anything, because if she didn't open her mouth,
100%. Definitely Shanda should have hid the fact that her oldest son was a psychopath and really getting off on like, you know, hurting and damaging disabled kids around so that he could have been on the outside. And Shanda could have used him to abuse more children from prison, you know? I mean, come on, Jenny. Like, this is where someone in charge needs to step in. This is where there needs to be like a mother of the prison who steps in and is like, no, cut it off. Throw the iPad away. Get this woman out of his life. We're not playing these games. This is silly. This is a stupid fantasy that you guys are playing with. Your brother is dead and people have been very hurt by your actions, Paul. We're not going to let you have some sort of silly anime, ridiculous psychopath girlfriend on the phone and on your iPad every night. No, done.
There wouldn't have been any fucking reason for them to go through the fucking text messages and all that shit, you know? And I could never imagine throwing my daughter under the bus. I couldn't do it. I could not fucking do it. And to see her shaking her head when you were talking like you were lying, I'm like, I want to kill this bitch.
Did you hear her testimony?
Oh, yeah. I heard everything. I've seen everything.
Unbelievable.
And I don't even know that I need to say much more. We can hear Paul is loving this. He's eating it up. This is justifying everything he did the way that he is. It's telling him he's right. Nolan and all these other people in his life, they just don't get it. Like, he finally found someone that gets him. And she is a psychopath loser who dates men in prison, you know, but at least it's somebody. And I remember reading on Reddit recently, someone was like, Paul probably never would have had a girlfriend in the real world because of how like crazy, messed up and lazy he was. And unfortunately, it's almost like he gets to live his best life through the fame that he acquired, from the crime that he committed. It's absolutely disgusting. It's difficult to hear. And that's why I'm not going to stop like calling attention to it and how wrong this is. I have heard that Paul has been placed into protective custody. He was moved to the prison. He was moved from the jail to prison over the past couple of days. And he pretty quickly had to go into protective custody because so many people were after him. I've also heard that Zav Girl, the YouTube channel, is saying she's going to do a pretty big interview this weekend. And I'm wondering if it's going to be with Baby Girl.
I got pissed at a freaking body language expert that did an analysis on you, saying that you have no empathy and no care for your brother that died. And
whoever it was letting their personal feelings block their sight.
This to me is just further evidence that Jenny spends all of her time on YouTube, like looking up Paul, seeing who's talking about him, and she's really into the videos and the attention. And that's what she's in this for. She's probably like been obsessed with Zav Girl and all of these other people who've covered the case. Not saying anything wrong with the YouTubers, but I just think that that's why she's doing this. She wants to start off with being YouTube famous, move on to TikTok, and then graduate to getting an HBO special. And, we've seen this happen with Gypsy Rose Blanchard as well. And it's hard because I think there's so much to learn from these cases, and yet we don't want these people to benefit financially from the horrible things that they did.
And he was like basically like watching you on the stand and then like pausing it and analyzing things. And I'm like sitting there and I'm thinking, because, now I've talked to you, I know your personality, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, these people have it so wrong. Like, it's so wrong. My opinion, and I might be wrong, but my opinion is that you kind of came from a life like me where you really didn't have the best of parents, and anything that you could do to try to gain some kind of acceptance or camaraderie or something. But then I think it got to a point where then you were like, something's not right here. But if she would have taken your brother to the hospital the day that you sent those photos, I believe he would still be alive. I do. And because of that, that's why I'm so angry and disgusted with the outcome of everything, because that's what I truly, in my heart, believe. Even before I knew I was going to talk to you, that's what I believe.
What? Agreed. But it doesn't negate the fact that Paul didn't take him to the hospital. Paul didn't call 911. Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think there's a lot going on with Paul, and I have a lot of reasons to feel some sympathy for him. And I don't feel that with Shanda. For a multitude of reasons. All right, we're actually going to stop here, and I will be putting out part 2 of this call probably tomorrow. And I'm also going to go over a call between Shanda and her new prison girlfriend, in which they talk extensively about Paul and baby girl. So I hope that you'll join me again this weekend as we head down another rabbit hole.